Hey all, Rob here. Don't forget to subscribe and hit the notification bell so you know when future videos are out. And this is just a Toy Biz, I guess, appreciation talk of the articulation and the detailing of stuff back in the day of 20 years ago, give or take, versus now. And as we get to the Spider-Man figures, there is something about the Spider-Man 1 superposable movie figure that just balances right and very easy. And the superposable Spider-Man 2 action figure with incredible balance, the Elektra action figure, the way it just balances out. And then you have the Far From Home, which I will compare later, or even the black costume Spider-Man. Just look at that. And that is the Black Widow variant of Yelena from the comic books, which we'll get to in a second. Just hold on a minute. Just gotta adjust the camera. So, you know, what to talk about first, okay? Well, first, let's talk about the Far From Home action figure. You cannot pose this figure like this, like that, or even like that. It's impossible. You don't have the toe articulation, so the best you could do is something like that. And then you wonder, for example, why are the web lines not painted in when not only was this painted in, it was raised webbing, and every strand was painted in for just under $10 back in the day. And look at this texturing. You know, they really did a fantastic job on this incredible texturing. Look at that. And so they had to paint applications to do all this, but they don't have the paint applications to do this. And what was probably one of the worst case scenarios is Shocker, which has an incredible sculpt. I used a Gundam marker to paint the lines in. Thankfully, it was sculpted in, the lines, the detailing of the line areas. They did sculpt it in there, but they didn't apply the paint to the lines for Shocker, so I had to paint in the lines for the Shocker. All of this. So that's a choice to make. So for Shocker, I had to really put those lines in. It didn't seem complete without it. And this Spider-Man, I'm probably not going to do anything about it. But you have the detailing, the sculpt is there, but... And I do like the sculpting here on the blue sections where it's supposed to be. All the design work that they did. But why is this blank and there's like no shading? But back then there was. And what's funny is, as I'm making this video, if you look on eBay for Spider-Man 1 and Spider-Man 2 action figures from the movie, and the Green Goblin and the Doc Ock, they're almost $200 each and more. You know, they're in the 100+ range, used or brand new, which is like 200+ range, unopened. Let's check out the articulation and stuff, but let's start with the females, okay? Let's just move this to the side a bit. Electra, look at this posing. It seems just right, and it seems very Frank Miller art style like. And this was the Black Widow mold. And they did use similar body molds, but let's go with the Black Widow here. First, I wonder with this head sculpt, could I just like hot water, pop it off, modify it, and put it on a Hasbro retro Black Widow base body? Might be possible. I think has some potential there to customize. They had double elbows back then, but they had this very weird articulation point, which kind of didn't make sense, you know, right by the shoulder here. And then they had one right under it. And the same for Electra, for example. Articulation point here, but right under it. So there's a little area between. Oh, that's weird, right? Had right under here for like a butterfly effect, but no forward or back, but just kind of like that they were experimenting with. And double elbows. The four fingers had an articulation point back then. It's better to swap hands now. They did have that. I think the torso articulation was better back then because you had the waist and you had the torso, so it moved better. And I really don't get why the female sculpts now don't have both the torso and the waist. You really need that waist articulation. It adds a lot. The hip area, for example, ball jointed, had a double knee articulation and the calf articulation. But the ankles, it was back then. The stuff now is better, Hasbro, and they were experimenting then, putting down the sides, but it did have toe articulation. Most of the figures back then, the women, so toe articulation was a standard. Pose the women in a crouching down, in a variety of poses that really you get a variety of poses with the females back then that it's like, could they do that now with the Hasbro stuff to that level? It's just kind of weird that you really can't. I'd say one of the best candidates for it is you look at the Far From Home, let's say the hip area. I just think on some of the Toy Biz stuff, that the hip area, the way it was sculpted and the ball jointed, that there was a higher range of motion than what most of the stuff on Hasbro has now in terms of just the posability of it. It's like, look at that. No Hasbro figure without toe articulation can do that pose. It's impossible. So this figure can't do that. But this figure, possibly one of the most articulated. Let's get to this. And I do like the Hasbro, the simple ball jointed head, how they make it with the ball joint. And especially when the ball joint could go down a bit or forward. Sometimes they have that motion when you put the articulation, it could go forward. And I don't think that's the case here, but you do get a nice posability with how they standardize that and how they standardize the ankle articulation, which I really like. It seems like they're always in the experimental phase with the Toy Biz days, where it was like very different between this area, the head area, and how you could pose it up. and to the sides. But back then you did have the butterfly articulation, even back then. But you also could go up. So this Spider-Man could go like that. Go to touch the head area easier. So you had that weird kind of like experimental butterfly articulation, and then up and down here, and then the ball jointed shoulders here with the bicep articulation. Of course the double elbows and the articulation here right by the glove area. And I do like that nowadays in Hasbro they got the swap out hands. I think that works better and it's easy to do. And you know, usually the wrist was attached to the arm area, the forearm. But look at this. Each finger has an articulation point, so you can have the classic first finger thumb out, which is how in the comics he originally shot the webbing out. Put the fingers in the middle down there for the classic posing. And it's kind of weird. I'm not sure. You had that double cut. Here's the upper, and then you had the waist, then you had the lower here, and then you have the waist here. But here's another thing that Toy Biz did, but Hasbro like cheapened out on. Well, they do got the pinless, and I believe the pinless is the next level, thankfully. But in a lot of cases before the pinless, Hasbro didn't paint the legs on the Spider-Man, on the inner arm. On this, it faded away, so it was painted, you could see, but it rubbed off through the years. You see it's red on the outside and blue on the inside, but usually on a lot of Hasbro figures, they went cheap and didn't paint the inside, which you really should have, because it looks bad. But thankfully the pinless is the future. So between the ball jointed head is very nice. I like how they did that, and the ankle area. And I do like that the pinless tech is coming up to be a standard. But look at that waist articulation. And I just think the hips here were better in terms of overall context, in terms of, look at that, the way the hips go. And it's easy to move around. And you got like that right there. It's just very nice that sometimes Hasbro does these thigh cuts. They kind of look weird if you don't pose it right. But I always thought this very upper ball joint thigh cut right by the hip, I thought that looked better and less obvious in terms of standing out in a bad way. I just thought putting it high up is just like the way to go. And look, toe articulation, no problem. And has that double articulation there and there. It has the mentioned the butterfly, but also it could go, you can move it up or down there. And oddly, I think this very old figure of the Spider-Man black costume is one of the best black costume Spider-Man figures until we got to the recent retro Spider-Man in the black costume, which is probably the best one. The retro Spider-Man in the black costume, but between that and this is probably one of the other best Spider-Mans in that classic symbiote costume. Because in many cases, I never liked when they did like blue highlights, or they painted the spider in the eyes silver, and it's just like, I didn't like any of that stuff. Or they miss maybe painting that area in, or the eyes are way, way too big, which he never had it that big, like the one on the Pizza Spidey Buck body. No, I didn't like that figure. The eyes were never supposed to be that big. So you could see the articulation, you could see the balance really, and the variety of posability. And I just think that, like the experimental Toy Biz stuff, that there was articulation points that now that are nice, such as I mentioned, the head area, the pegs there, the swap out hands, and the ankle areas. I think those are all nice, and the pinless tech is the future. But I think the hip area, the thigh area cuts by like the ball joint, make it high up, and the shoulders with the butterflies as well as up and down there, I think those were just better articulation points. Oops, that fell. And maybe they could go back to trying the double cut, which isn't bad, such as here. The one thing that I didn't like on the Retro Spidey, besides them not painting in the pegs here, was on the Retro Spidey, that body mold, they don't have a waist articulation. And that really, it like annoys me. That a waist articulation should be a standard. And you could do a waist articulation here, as well as here, and move the upper body here. But not to have that waist articulation on that body mold, it really, oh man, it just should be a standard. And it should be without question. You know what? Even though McFarlane, almost all of his toys have toe articulation, and I understand most of Hasbro doesn't, but few characters should have always toe articulation, in my opinion, from Marvel. Again, not every character needs it, okay? Mr. Fantastic, Nick Fury, the Punisher, Cyclops, they don't need toe articulation. But I think any Spider-Man character, Deadpool, Wolverine, those three, Spider-Man, Deadpool, and Wolverine, every figure should have a toe articulation. The way they pose, the way they act in the comic books, it should be a standard for those three. And maybe there are a few more characters, but I would stand by those three as having the toe articulation. It should be a standard that, you know, if McFarlane is doing that in all his action figures, why can't Hasbro just do that for the Spider-Man figures? You know, this figure can never pose like that. It can't. And they said the Spider-Man, Tobey Maguire, and the Andrew Garfield figures that they're making are 100% new sculpts. The Spider-Man will have the raised webbing, and the lines will be painted in. I just hope it has toe articulation and could it live up to the standard of the past? Could the new Spider-Man to this quality? I guess we shall see, you know. I didn't like the Andrew Garfield Spider-Man one that they made, and I sold that figure because I didn't like that pizza body mold. It wasn't right. The torso was too long. It was too thin. The proportions were way too off for me to appreciate that figure. So I did sell that one. But, man, it's like a high level to live up to. And we will see, you know. And the women, they had the double elbows, the toe articulation, bicep swivel. They had all this, the torso and the waist. They had this years ago, you know. And hopefully under women body molds in the future, besides the torso, that they will add the waist articulation to make that a standard. And so that's just a little random toy talk. Not meant to be a review, but just a discussion. So let me know if you liked it or want to see stuff like this in the future. Thanks for watching. Don't forget to subscribe. Stay safe, my friends, and I will talk to you later.